basis would be a substantial revenue source to us. And Mr. De Leon, I think you perhaps jokingly said for the oil severance tax, you'd go for the Tranquillian. So I'm sure this is going to pass on a 3-2 basis. I'm not going to support it, but it's going to pass on a 3-2 basis. So perhaps you should rethink the approval of that. But why is it that with this need for revenue, that we're not even bringing that issue back up, which I think we left as an open item? I don't think that we addressed that. And I'm at a complete loss, given the pleas for revenues and the known opposition from our side with regard to tax policy, our position on tax policy, and our expressed support for that proposal, that all of a sudden it has disappeared into the thin air.
Mr. Blumenfield and Ms. Walters.
Thank you. We're having this general discussion about taxes, and I want to just remind us all, we're talking about not generally taxes. We're talking about something that's very, very targeted. It's not the big discussion. We're talking about some very smart and targeted taxes. The oil severance tax, I want to remind everyone, is something that is federally deductible. It kind of goes with our model that we've been pushing, whereby we want to maximize federal dollars when it comes to finding cuts that are offset by federal funds. And here is a tax that is going to allow companies to offset through federal deductions. Extraordinary times call for extraordinary measures. I mean, we are on the verge of financial insolvency. We have to be able to consider revenue options as well as these drastic cuts. We are in a very precarious position, and we need to do extraordinary things. Nobody likes any form of taxes, but we have to be able to think about these things. We've just finished crafting, in many ways, one of the cruelest budgets in terms of cuts that I think we've seen in modern history. Now, it's much, much better than what the governor put out, and I stand by it as the solution that we need to push in order to get us out of this crisis. But when you think about the cuts that we've been making, and you think about the proportion of these very targeted taxes, it is not that much in terms of proportionality. It's less than $2 billion in cuts. You think about the big picture. Per capita spending on a student in California is well below the national average. The amount that we recover from oil extraction, also well below the national average. This kind of proposal allows us a mechanism to bring both of those closer to the national average, and that makes sense. Thank you.
Ms. Walters and Ms. Ducheney.
Actually, I don't need to make comments because Mr. Neal so eloquently made my point.
Thank you. Ms. Ducheney.
I think it's the point here, members, is to have a budget solution that is complete and to reach all of the numbers that we're trying to get to. And I think the exercise over the last month has been to think about thoughtfully how we can reduce programs. We certainly all appreciate that had to occur in this revenue environment. But we have to also remember we had these reductions, and I'm very partial to. Would these be my favorite two in life? I'm big on federally deductible taxes. I always like income taxes. That's why I think the vehicle license fee is one that we ought to stabilize at a better level than 0.65 and make some version of permanent. I certainly think a lot of the eliminations that were proposed by the LAO are appropriate. I don't know whether we continue to do those through policy bills. There's, or other ways of really looking at the whole system. I think the tax commission, we had hoped initially, starting last year when we started it, would come out by April. Unfortunately, they think their work is going to take them until August. So we are here today without the information of that tax commission, who I think is probably going to recommend some of these broader issues, and have been hearing solely tax issues for 6 months. Whether we broaden the sales tax because you can lower it, if you broaden it to services, whether you do some of these major tax reforms. All of those, I think, are legitimate and things that we need to figure out over the long run how we are going to restructure this government to pay for the services. You know, we talk a lot about the economy here, and we're worried about both jobs and the impact on business of different decisions. But we also have to remember that a lot of reason businesses come to California, and the reason we have 40-some Fortune 500 countries, and the reason we have a Silicon Valley, the reason we have a biotech industry, are because people like to live in California. And they like to live in California because we have a coastline. They like to live in California because we have really beautiful parks. They like to live in California, and they bring their businesses to California because we have one of the best university systems in the country. We used to, anyway. And hopefully we will be able to maintain those things and the quality of life that people move to California for in order to keep those businesses coming back. So, you know, whether these particular revenue sources are the best on earth, I don't know. They're simple, they're direct, they're things the public supports, as others have said. They're things that public in the past has clearly indicated support for. And they are things that the governor in the past has supported, even if he doesn't like to do it today. And, you know, the governor's comments earlier today to attack the committee for a single vote when we have been struggling through his proposals that were not very well thought out, that were that had no respect for program, and to say, well, gosh, you refuse to cut employees. I mean, he's had 5 years to negotiate contracts with employees. He got around to one in February finally. That contract, if we were to pass it, would save $320 million. Now folks aren't sure they want to pass it because he added an extra furlough day. He's laying off people. This was an effort. This was not just about, the motion before us was not, the one that we rejected, was not just about lowering pay people for 15%. It's disingenuous of the governor to say 5%. It's 15% is what the proposal was, and requiring us to overturn collective bargaining law. That is what the point was. We're not doing that. The governor needs to learn how to bargain. Just like he needs to learn how to talk to the legislature, he needs to learn how to bargain with employees. If he'd have gone with the correctional officers 2 years ago, when other people around here tried to help them get a contract, he'd have been saving $1 billion over the last 2 years. If he'd have bargained with the state employees that he finally sat down with in February over a year ago when they asked for it, he'd have saved money last year and this year. There's plenty of savings available in a lot of these areas that they have not taken advantage of. We're now trying to clean that up, but we are not going to do it by decimating the safety net and all of the reasons people move to California, come here in the first place. So, this is a way of, granted, members, of stopgapping, of saying that we're going to make this whole complete, and we are going to figure out how to put ourselves in a position where the cash flow is appropriate, where we can go to the bond markets by showing a budget that is, in fact, balanced. That's the object, and that's what these are about. They have no other special purpose or underlying agenda.
Okay, I'll make...
Madam Chair, can I answer Senator Leno's question that he asked?
Sure.
About where I got the source of my information? Because I just wanted to make sure. It was actually a study that was done by LECJ. They're located, or CG, they're located in Emeryville. It's Dr. Bill Ham, I believe, former LAO, and also Dr. Jose Alberto. And it was a study they did back in June of this year, and that's where I got the $10,000 job loss. Also, as far as trying to talk about who's to blame or anything, but wait a minute. Denise, you said quite a bit, but the fact of the matter is this whole problem we're dealing with today started back when the dot-com bubble burst, because at that time, the legislature, along with the governor at that point, were talked into doing ongoing programs, knowing that, and everybody advised them, because I think even the LAO's office and everybody else said these are one-time revenues. And yes, they may decide to make a determination to go ahead with long-term commitments. So it is, this problem, we've been fighting with this problem, for the last 9 years.
Madam Chair.
Okay, it isn't just
Madam Chair, let me just...
Wait a minute, members. Wait a minute. I've got people chatting. Mr. Leno has a very brief comment. Everybody else has spoken here. I have not. I'd like to say my piece and then get to voting on Mr. Dutton's motion, which is on the floor. So, Mr. Leno, go ahead and make your very brief comment.
All right. First, I want to thank my colleague for sourcing his information. But I also want to point out that, yes, legislature prior to our arrival did create some new programs at the height of the dot-com boom in 1998, but the biggest and largest and ongoing spending program put in place by that same legislature when we had surplus tax dollars was an ongoing tax cut that is here with us today, and that is the vehicle license fee, $30 billion over the past 10 years. And that's a spending program we have yet to deal with, recognizing we don't have the money to pay for that spending program, and it is by far the largest that was created in the past 10 years, $6 billion annually, and correct me if I'm wrong.
We'd note that the vehicle license fee was one of the taxes that was increased as part of the February package, and it's now at 1.15%.
Minimally, and for 2 years, we'll be back to the 1/3, or the 2/3 loss that's coming from the general fund to keep cities and counties whole.
Okay, well, that actually segues quite nicely into what I was going to say, and I won't repeat a lot of everything has been said, I think, on all sides here. But I did want to note that we've had something like a 20+% drop in revenues that we had anticipated in collecting, and the idea that we might be able to somehow solve that problem by not considering new revenues, to me, is both irresponsible and unrealistic. The other point I would make is some folks have talked, well, there is this mantra out there, live within our means. And while that sounds really nice, it sounds really simple, and it sounds really responsible, it's meaningless. Our means are completely within our control. And as has been pointed out by numerous people, we have just recently given away huge corporate subsidies in February. We have given away other tax reductions over many, many years. We've created new tax loopholes. In good times, we routinely give away taxes, and then in lean times, we never replace those tax deductions or close those loopholes. We continuously borrow, which is an enormous cost that we shift on into future years, and we find ourselves now with a deficit an ongoing structural deficit that we simply can't close. So live within our means doesn't mean anything. The fact is we have a state that has a population that have needs that we have a moral obligation to provide. And not only that, we have a social agreement to provide these services that maybe isn't shared unanimously, and I understand we have some difference of opinion as to the extent of those services and what those should be. But the fact is the vast majority of Californians expect good public schools. They expect excellent universities. They expect beautiful parks that are maintained and usable. They expect good public safety programs. They expect clean water. They expect clean air. And it is our responsibility collectively, I believe, as a legislature and as the chief executive, the governor, to provide for the expectations of those Californians. So that is why we have to talk about this, and that is why I will support this. We have crafted this tax package very carefully. Unless you are a smoker, an individual Californian will pay nothing more in new taxes under this proposal. So to me, that's the bottom line. I fully recognize we are in very difficult fiscal straits. I do not want to saddle working Californians with any additional taxes. I wasn't real happy with the package that we passed in February because, in my opinion, a sales tax does exactly that. And so this is very carefully targeted, very carefully crafted. You sitting out there in the audience, unless you're an oil company, unless you're a smoker, you're not going to pay any more in taxes. But the state will have more revenues, and we can continue providing the services to some very limited extent, I'll admit at this point, that our people expect and demand. And so that's why I will support this. We do have a motion on the floor, however, to reject it, so I'd like to take a vote on that first. So that's the motion. We have 2 ayes in the Senate, 3 noes in the Senate, and we have 2 ayes in the Assembly and 3 noes in the Assembly. And now I will entertain a motion to adopt this package. It's been moved. In the Senate, it is 3 ayes and 2 noes, and in the Assembly, it is 3 ayes and 2 noes. I would note that that is the last item on our agenda, and it, I think, was a very excellent and lively and comprehensive debate to end with. I did want to note that on the other package that we adopted this package and the revenue enforcement and acceleration provisions package, they do include appropriate administrative costs to implement. Those are all the action items that we have to take, and I would ask members if anybody has any very brief closing comments they might like to make before we recess. All right, Mr. Blumenfield.
I just want to acknowledge and thank the chair for doing such a splendid job in moving us forward in such a wonderful way. Thank you.
I appreciate that. You've all been a joy to work with, and I know we're trying to get out of here, and we will very quickly. But there's a lot of people I need to thank. Did anybody at the table have anything they wanted to add? Department of Finance or LAO? Okay. I do want to thank a whole lot of people who kept this all running. The sergeants in particular were really excellent when we had all that public hearing. We had a number of people that kept us on track here that are on my staff. The Department of Finance, you've been excellent, really. I know that sometimes you've been on the hot seat, but we very much appreciated the answers that you've given us and the information you've provided. Legislative analyst, excellent as well. Your advice and your guidance is always very much appreciated. I want to thank all of our staff, and I honestly would love to say thank you to each one of you individually, but there's so many of you, I think it's impossible. But the Republican staff, the Democratic staff, the Senate staff, the Assembly staff have all been very cooperative. And the members as well, I do want to mention, this has been, as I said at the beginning, we've had some very difficult issues to work through. But I think we've done it with a great deal of respect and good humor. And I appreciate the fact that it's not just the chair that does that, the members do it as well. And you have all made my job so much easier, which I thoroughly appreciate. And I want to thank the television staff that has kept the public informed, and the public as well for all of their participation. And I will recess. We will not adjourn. We will recess the conference committee to reconvene upon call of the chair. Thank you so much.